Well, Arkansas GOP Senator Tom Cotton joins us now with what we can expect today. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning, Ainsley. Good to be on with you.
Well, thanks for being on with us. So every senator gets 30 minutes. That's 11 hours. What's going to happen today?
Well, I feel sorry for those kids having to sit through all those senators talking like they did yesterday as well. I think Judge Barrett is going to handle herself expertly today. She's obviously an outstanding judge and a constitutional expert. As I saw the hearings yesterday, though, I got to say, Ainsley, I thought I'd stumbled into a hearing of the Senate Health Committee, not the Senate Judiciary Committee. The Democrats kept talking about Obamacare and pre-existing conditions as if the Supreme Court's job is to make health care policy. It's not their job. It's the job of the Congress and the President. One reason that they're focusing on that is they want to cover up the continued failures of Obamacare and higher premiums, or what the individual mandate did to tax families who couldn't afford Obamacare. That's why I worked to have it repealed. And of course, when you hear them talk about pre-existing conditions, one thing that they try to gloss over is the fact that we also have a plan to cover pre-existing conditions. I mean, I think about the teacher I met in Arkansas this year who had been teaching school and had a pre-existing condition herself, and now she's going to be teaching the virtual class in that school. And even her little girls decided to stay home as well to help protect their mother. Of course, we want to provide coverage for her and for every Arkansan. What we don't want to do is have Obamacare continue to drive up rates for every other Arkansan. But those are questions for us in the Congress and the President. That's not what the Supreme Court does, and I would suggest that Judge Barrett simply tell those senators today that you're responsible for health care policy, not the Supreme Court.
One thing's pretty stark is that if Vice President Biden wins the election, things are going to change dramatically. I mean, the D.C. being a state, Senator Schumer says absolutely that's getting contention. Stacking the court, packing the court, that is something we are looking at. Everything is on the table. When you talk about the Electoral College, that is on the table. So things could change dramatically. They could even add districts to the House and make it even harder for Republicans to win back. Joe Biden has been followed all over the trail by this question: are you going to pack the court? And he has this very innovative way of getting around it, refusing to answer. Here he kind of answered yesterday. Listen.
Court packing is going on now. Never before, when an election has already begun and millions of votes already cast, has it ever been that a Supreme Court nominee was put forward. I'm not a fan of court packing, but I don't want to get off on that whole issue. I want to keep focused. The president would love nothing better than to fight about whether or not I would, in fact, pack the court or not pack the court, etc. The focus is, why is he doing what he's doing now? That's the court packing the public should be focused on.
So what is he talking about? The president would love to focus on what I'm going to do. How dare he?
Well, as usual, it's a little hard to follow what Joe Biden means, but court packing has had a very concrete, very clear meaning to ordinary citizens and experts alike for 83 years. It's trying to add justices to the court because you don't like the current number or the current judicial philosophy of justices. What does it mean to court pack? What does it mean to Arkansans? It means that you would have essentially a super legislature that would work in concert with Democrats in Congress to help take away their guns, to take their tax dollars and make it fund abortion, to limit the way they worship their own God, to take away their own property, sometimes their homes, and give it away to giant multinational corporations who are well connected in Washington. Those are just a few of the things that court packing would mean to normal Arkansans. That's one reason why it is so radical. It's really only been tried once in our history in 1937, and not even Franklin Delano Roosevelt, at the peak of his powers, could achieve such a radical reform that would fundamentally undermine the Supreme Court and our independent judiciary.
Right.
It's time for Joe Biden to give a clear answer.
And Senator, I've heard a number of Republicans on your side of the aisle talk about that's the difference between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans are looking for justices who, in her case, are originalists or textualists, whereas Democrats look for justices who would effectively become a super legislature in robes.
Yeah, the left in America wants outcome-oriented justices that will always rule in the liberal direction, no matter what the law says. I've reviewed all of Judge Barrett's opinions on the circuit court. I'm confident that some of her results she probably did not like because they let hardened criminals back out on the streets. But that's what the law and the Supreme Court precedent said. And she cited Justice Scalia's old maxim that if you're a judge who never reaches a result on the law and facts with which you disagree personally, you're probably not a very good judge. Judge Barrett is exactly right. Judges need to rule on the law and the facts. They need to leave the political and the moral judgment up to the people acting through their elected representatives. But the Democrats want judges who will simply rule in the way they want to achieve their desired outcome.
Senator, thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yeah, do we have a couple more minutes with him?
If you have one more question, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, hey, Senator, I just got to ask you about what just came down with this lockdown. The WHO says we should never do that again. It cost us $16 trillion. They told us to do it, and now they say it's unhealthy. The one who are most at risk among us pay the greatest price. Those who are poor or oppressed and farmers pay the greatest price. What do you say about this revelation, what they told us in April, as opposed to what they're telling us now after we did it?
Brian, it's another example of the WHO being guided by politics, not by science. They insisted that countries lock down their economies for months on end. Some governors and mayors are still doing that today, citing the WHO and what they purport to call science, when in reality it's simply their desire to exert more control over their citizens.
All right, I know you got to run to do a radio interview. Thanks so much, Senator.
Thanks, Senator.